Hey guys, welcome back. I have another book review for you today. This week I read The Ghost Map by Steven Johnson, and I'm going to give this book 3 stars. This book is not exactly what I was expecting, but it is a really interesting read. So this is about the 1854 cholera outbreak in London, and this book kind of goes on to tell you about how that changed the modern world, basically, about how it changed infrastructure, it led to breakthroughs in science, and in turn it kind of changed the modern world. So I thought that this was going to be a book about the cholera epidemic. That's just kind of what I was thinking. I thought it was going to be mostly the epidemic itself, and that is not what it was. So there would be a little bit in each chapter about the epidemic, about the people that were getting sick or what was going on, but a lot of it was kind of the background or behind the scenes, I guess, of an epidemic. So you have the government, so the public health committees, the parliament, everyone kind of trying to figure out what's causing this, how do we make it stop, and what are we supposed to do. And this is Victorian London, so you have to consider that they didn't know at this time that cholera was transmitted through dirty water. They thought that cholera and all other illnesses were kind of brought on by bad air, dirty air. If it smelled bad, that's what it was. And maybe even it was your internal constitution that decided if you were going to get cholera, which we now know is extremely wrong. But this is 1854, and that's not what they thought. So this follows the outbreak, kind of what they're thinking, and then this man called John Snow, who is cholera trials by water, it's got to be the water, and also a reverend named Henry Whitehead, who helped Snow to prove this theory even though he didn't believe it at first. So it's really interesting. It also kind of touches on science and epidemiology and virology and all of those things, but also urbanization and the growth of cities, and how the growth of cities is affected by things like cholera outbreaks. So this book was written in 2006. So there is a long part at the end about how there could be an outbreak in a city in the future, and how this guy thinks that it'll be dealt with, which is not exactly how it was dealt with when when coronavirus, COVID-19 really became a thing last year. So I'm interested to see if he'll write anything about that, because what he thinks will happen and then what did happen when a large-scale pandemic did hit the world were quite different. But this is about the cholera outbreak of 1854. So cholera is largely eradicated in the developed world, very developed world. I think there was a cholera outbreak in South America in the early 2000s. So cholera is not by any means eradicated in the entire world. There was also a bad one, I think, in Iran in the 90s. So it's still very much alive. So basically what cholera does is you drink it. You can't, inhaling it won't do anything. You have to drink it, and it basically empties out your small intestine to the point of dehydrating you. So what you need to do in order to combat cholera is rehydrate to a ridiculous extent. And some people were surviving this cholera outbreak in 1854. It's called the Broad Street cholera outbreak. They were surviving by drinking the same water that had infected them, but cholera is also something that doesn't live very long. I'm not going to try to explain to you about cholera because I am not a scientist or an epidemiologist or anything else, and really anything that I say you could just counteract me. From what I understand, cholera doesn't live very long, so you have to it needs to thrive quickly and spread quickly, otherwise it will die. So I was actually reading this while I drank water and coffee, and I know that in the modern world today, your sewer and your fresh water rarely intermingle. In large cities today, it's set up to where that does not happen, and also the filtration systems in place ensure that nothing like that is getting into your water. But as I was like drinking my water from the faucet, I was like so nervous. I was like, oh no, like I don't want to drink water anymore. But of course I continued to drink it. I understand that it's fine, but it's just so strange. Anyway, so this kind of starts out in 1854 in London, and it's telling you like what London is like. And guys, like London was gross. Okay, it was really bad. Basically, all of their sewer went into the Thames, which is this large river that flows right through the center of London. If you've ever been to London, it is a large river. If you have not, take my word for it. I've seen it, and it is still quite like, it's a city river. So out in the country, it's probably fine, but like in the city, it looks like dark sludge kind of water. It looks gross. No offense, I think London is a beautiful city, but the Thames does look kind of gross, but it's a city river. All city rivers are kind of gross. I grew up by the Red River in Louisiana, and in the city, it is also gross. So like that's just the thing of city rivers. Anyway, so the pipes for the drinking water also came right out of the Thames, which means that it's sewage. You're drinking sewage. And they had made this law that said that they needed to move these like upstream or downstream to where they weren't pulling from that part, and this one water company didn't do it. And it was that water company's pump that got infected. It was on Broad Street, which is why it's called the Broad Street Cholera Outbreak. It got infected. And people also had these like cesspits outside their houses, and they could just throw like dirty water and like refuse into them, and it was seeping into the well at Broad Street. Like it's so just like insane that like less than 200 years ago, this was like what they were doing in cities. And you know, London grew very rapidly. So we kind of talk about all of this to say that like that outbreak was preventable and that it changed everything. So they made London built these super elaborate sewers to like circumvent this problem so it wouldn't happen again. Other cities followed suit, which is kind of what helped to keep cholera from popping up in like American and big European cities today. And yeah, that's basically it. But as people continue to move to cities, like you need more infrastructure for that. He does get into a long part at the end about like urbanization and how like more than this is 2006 that he's writing this, so he's saying at that point more than 50% of people in the world live in cities, and that they were thinking by like 2050 or something more than 80% of people in the world would live in cities. I should have looked up to see like how much it is now, but I didn't. I thought this book was in like 2015, so I was thinking it was like relatively close, but at this point, 15 years ago, but it was fine. So, like I said, I personally was expecting a little bit more about the cholera epidemic itself. So the chapters are broken up, so it's like dates. And you're getting what John Snow, who is the one who figured out that cholera is waterborne or moves through water. Then Reverend Whitehead, who was helping him because he didn't agree, but then he came to agree, plus like the Board of Health and things like that. I don't know, I expected a lot more epidemic than behind the scenes of an epidemic. Epidemics do interest me. That's why I picked up this book. I didn't think it was bad, but I thought that for me, someone who isn't super into the science and like politics behind an epidemic, I'm just interested in the epidemic itself. This book was a little bit disappointing. It just wasn't what I expected. But that isn't to say that I didn't enjoy reading it. I thought that it was very informative. I thought that it was very interesting. I thought that the correlations between all of those things were very interesting. The ghost map in the title is a map that Jon Snow drew that shows all of the deaths in relation to all of the water pumps that prove that this particular water pump was the one. So I think that's really interesting. He's like the first one that really did this, and it got... it became super famous, and it is a good way to track epidemic and disease today still. So I thought that was interesting. Like, we're talking about epidemiology, we're talking about science, we're talking about urbanization, we're talking about modernization, we're talking about cartography, like just all of these things that maybe aren't that, like, doesn't seem like it makes that much sense to mix together, but they're intermingled so much, and all the correlations between all of them. And then you have like just the history of places, and it's just a lot of information, but I think that it's a really good book. So I would recommend it if that's something that interests you. If you're not super science minded, you might not love it, but I thought that it was good. I think that things like that are important to read just so you kind of understand the world around you a little bit more. So I would recommend that book. I got it from my library online, and I read it on my Kindle, which you can probably find it almost anywhere. I can't guarantee that it'll be free, but if you check it out from your library, it is. So that is Ghost Map and my thoughts on it. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I'll be back next week. Bye!